I remember the smell of frost more sharply than the sound of my own name. It clings to memory like iron on a cold tongue, a metallic promise of something waiting beyond the tree line. I was 45 the morning I set out, convinced I knew these mountains the way a reader knows a favorite page, every curve memorized, every silence familiar. October had started clear, a sky rinsed clean, but the peaks in the distance wore a pale haze that felt like an unspoken warning. I should have listened. The trail rose in slow switchbacks through stands of pine that sighed against one another, their needles whispering secrets to the wind. Sunlight broke into thin, golden shards between the branches, painting the moss in strokes of molten green. Each step released a damp woodland perfume of cedar and earth. I moved easily, my boots sinking into the forgiving loam, the rhythm of my breath matching the quiet pulse of the forest. Nothing hinted at the storm gathering far beyond sight. By noon, the air cooled with an edge that scraped the back of my throat. I felt it before I saw the first veil of clouds sliding over the western ridge, a gray tide swallowing the blue. The weather here is a trickster, patient until the moment it decides to strike. Still, I kept climbing, trusting the trail the way a sailor trusts the shape of familiar stars. When the snow began, it was soft as sifted flour, a quiet choreography of flakes that melted on contact. Minutes later, the sky collapsed into a roaring white. Wind knifed down the slope, bending the trees until their tops thrashed like trapped animals. The forest lost its depth trunks, turned to gray silhouettes, the ground to a blank page. I could no longer tell slope from sky. My compass needle trembled without direction, and the map in my head dissolved like ink in water. I pushed on, driven by a stubborn faith that the path would reveal itself if I kept moving. Instead, the woods shifted around me, rearranging into a maze of identical shadows. Rocks I didn't recognize jutted from the snow like the backs of drowned beasts. Every sound branches cracking, the hiss of driven flakes felt close enough to touch, yet came from nowhere I could name. My breath grew ragged, my gloves stiff with ice, and a slow numbness crept into my legs like a thief testing locks. As daylight thinned to a pewter glow, panic threaded through the cold. I had hours at most before the temperature would carve its final verdict. I tried to retrace my steps, but the storm erased each footprint as soon as it formed. The forest seemed to inhale me, swallowing distance, until I felt less like a man walking, and more like a thought drifting through an endless gray mind. Then movement. A dark silhouette far off between the pines, too tall for a deer, too deliberate for the sway of trees. I blinked hard, but the figure remained, an ink stroke against the blizzard's blur. It shifted one step, then another silent as falling ash. Something in my chest tightened. A note struck deep enough to vibrate the bones. Logic whispered bear, but the gait was wrong, upright, balanced, almost regal in its patience. I stood rooted, snow piling on my shoulders, while the shape paused as if it knew I was watching. The storm roared, yet in that instant every sound folded inward, leaving only the quiet drum of my heartbeat. My mind raced through explanations, hallucination, shadow, death playing tricks, but each possibility fell away like brittle bark. The figure waited, neither approaching nor retreating, a question written in flesh I could not read. The wind surged again, flinging icy needles across my face. When I wiped my eyes clear, the silhouette had shifted closer, its outline sharper against the swirling white. Taller than any man, broad across the shoulders, it seemed carved from midnight itself, the snow clinging to its surface without melting. My breath hitched, a cloud of vapor that trembled in the air between us. Another step, deliberate, balanced, almost considerate. The ground beneath me pulsed, like it missed a heartbeat. I could not tell whether the tremor came from the earth or from the animal rhythm of my own fear. I only knew that something alive, something vast, was studying me through the storm, and the wilderness around us seemed to bow in quiet acknowledgement. The wind clawed at my hood as if it meant to strip me bare, yet that dark figure held its place, a stillness that felt almost ceremonial. My knees threatened to buckle, not from cold alone, but from the weight of knowing I was no longer alone in these woods. Snow spun between us like silver sand in an hourglass, and the world narrowed to the space between its shadow and my breath. It moved first, a single step forward, soundless over the deep drifts, each motion slow and deliberate, as though to assure me I remained in control. My pulse stuttered against the icy cage of my chest. The creature raised one massive arm and curved its hand in a gesture so fluid it could only be intentional. Not a wave, not a threat, an invitation. I hesitated, the storm battering me with 1,000 tiny knives. Logic argued to stay put, to find my way back, but logic was a brittle match in a gale. I sensed without reason that refusing would mean surrendering to the cold before morning. My boots broke the crust of snow as I took a cautious step. The figure pivoted and began to glide between the pines, pausing every few yards until I followed. The forest shifted as we moved. Trees rose like cathedral pillars, their crowns blurred in a haze of driven snow. Branches snapped under the weight of ice, sending soft thuds into the muffled air. I tried to count my steps, but numbers lost meaning in the endless white. What remained was the steady rhythm of the figure, ahead each stride a silent metronome, keeping me tethered to purpose. Minutes or hours slipped away. My breath became a low rasp. The snow thickened, swallowing the faint trail of my own footprints. Still, the creature never faltered. It wove through the storm as though guided by a compass older than the mountains themselves. Whenever I lagged, it paused and turned, its eyes catching what little light remained. Two dark coals holding an unreadable calm. My body began to fail. Toes burned, then went numb. Fingers curled useless inside my gloves. I stumbled on a hidden branch and crumpled to my knees. The snow welcomed me with a suffocating softness. I wanted to rest just for a moment. Through the haze, the figure returned, towering above like a monolith of living night. It didn't touch me, but its presence pressed against the storm, a gravity that urged me back to my feet. I rose, swaying, and it resumed the path. I followed, less a choice than an instinct as old as survival. A break in the wind revealed a new sound, the muted rush of water somewhere below. Soon the trees thinned, revealing a granite wall veiled by icicles. Behind that glittering curtain yawned a black seam in the rock, a cave mouth so narrow I would have walked past it 100 times without seeing. The creature stopped and gestured toward the opening, the motion firm but not forceful, like a guide showing the only door left in a burning house. I ducked inside, and the storm's fury softened to a distant roar. The air smelled of stone and damp moss. but it was warmer, threaded with a faint, resinous smoke. My eyes adjusted to the dim glow of embers banked in a shallow fire pit, their orange hearts pulsing like sleepy stars. Shadows climbed the walls in slow, liquid patterns. The figure followed, stooping to enter, and for the first time I saw it clearly. Thick fur matted with melting snow, shoulders broad enough to block the mouth of the cave. The shape of its head suggested both power and something startlingly familiar. Its eyes, deep and dark as mountain wells, held an intelligence I could not deny. It moved with quiet certainty, feeding dry twigs to the embers until a steady flame blossomed. Sparks spiraled upward toward a natural chimney in the stone ceiling. Without a word, it motioned for me to sit on a woven mat woven of dried reeds and grasses, carefully arranged to lift me off the cold ground. The fire's warmth seeped into my bones with measured patience. The creature watched closely, ensuring I stayed a safe distance, as if it understood the dangers of sudden heat to a body near hypothermia. It brought a carved wooden bowl of water that smelled faintly of minerals. My hands trembled as I drank, the cool liquid both grounding and surreal. Around me, the cave revealed its secrets. Smooth rock shelves held baskets of dried berries and strips of smoked meat, their placement meticulous. Tools hung from pegs, stone scrapers, wooden spoons polished to a soft sheen. Delicate awls shaped for precision. Nothing about this space belonged to chance. It was not a den, it was a home. The creature knelt across the fire, feeding it with a deliberate rhythm. The flames painted its features in strokes of amber and shadow. Despite its immense size, it radiated a stillness that eased the panic thrumming in my chest. The storm outside howled against the mountainside, but inside the cave the silence carried a different weight, not emptiness, but presence. I felt the ground beneath me vibrate faintly, as though the mountain itself acknowledged the bond forming in that small circle of firelight. And as I stared into those watchful eyes, a thought settled over me like falling ash. Whatever this being was, it had chosen to save me. The fire's crackle became a quiet metronome, each pop marking the slow thaw of my body. Heat crept inward from my fingers and toes, a patient tide pushing back the icy numbness. Across the flames, the towering figure moved with an economy of motion that was almost hypnotic. It sorted pieces of wood by size, shaved curls of bark for kindling, and adjusted the stones around the fire with a craftsman's precision. I watched, unable to look away. My mind still searched for an explanation. Man in costume, fever dream, primitive survivor, but none fit the quiet intelligence in every gesture. The creature lifted a flat, wooden bowl and poured a mixture of water and something fragrant over a cluster of leaves. Steam rose, carrying a scent both sharp and earthy, like pine needles bruised on warm stone. It set the bowl near me, nodding once. I sipped. The taste was bitter but strangely soothing, a forest distilled into liquid. My body relaxed, but my thoughts sharpened. Details leapt out of the shadows. A row of carefully woven baskets, each lined with dried moss. A stone shelf stacked with carved wooden tools. Bundles of herbs hanging from the walls like green constellations. This was not a random refuge. It was an organized world, shaped by deliberate hands. The figure approached with a mat of plaited reeds and draped it over my shoulders. The texture surprised me, soft yet strong, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of years spent mastering a single skill. I caught its gaze as it adjusted the mat. Those eyes were bottomless, like polished obsidian reflecting more than firelight. A flicker of curiosity passed between us, as if it too struggled to name what it saw. Outside, the storm's voice rose and fell, a distant ocean of wind and snow. Occasionally, a deep thud echoed through the stone, perhaps a heavy branch surrendering to ice. Each sound reminded me how thin the line between life and death had been only hours earlier. I should have been terrified, yet a strange calm settled over me. I felt as if the mountain itself had chosen to pause and breathe around this small cave. Time blurred. I drifted in and out of a shallow sleep, lulled by the steady rhythm of the creature's movements. Sometimes I woke to find it watching the entrance, shoulders squared as though standing guard. Other times it was shaping something with a stone blade, the scraping sound blending with the hiss of the fire. I never heard a single unnecessary noise. Every action carried purpose. When hunger gnawed again, it offered me strips of dried meat and a handful of berries so perfectly preserved they burst with flavor. The taste startled me awake, bright and wild, as if the forest itself had been concentrated into a single bite. I wondered how long it had taken to gather and prepare food with such care. The thought brought a sudden wave of humility. Out there I was a lost hiker. In here I was the guest of someone who understood survival as art. Later, when the storm quieted to a distant murmur, it motioned for me to stand. My legs trembled, but the creature waited patiently as I found balance. Without words, it began a slow circuit of the cave, showing me things as though giving a tour of a hidden kingdom. A narrow alcove revealed smooth wooden bowls stacked like nesting moons. Another crevice held a bundle of dried plants whose scent carried a hint of sweetness. It pointed toward a cluster of marks on the wall lines and swirls arranged in patterns that reminded me of rivers viewed from above. A map, perhaps, or a memory etched in stone. I traced one of the lines with my gloved finger. The rock felt warm, as if it had stored countless stories. When I looked back, the creature's gaze followed my hand. There was recognition there and something else, a quiet pride. We returned to the fire, and it sat opposite me, folding its long legs with surprising grace. The flames cast shifting light across its face, revealing contours both human and not. My thoughts spun with questions. Where did it come from? How many more like it? But the silence between us felt sacred, a space that words could only damage. Hours passed in a rhythm of small tasks. It repaired a basket, weaving strands of plant fiber with deft fingers. I helped by holding the ends when it gestured, our hands brushing briefly. The touch was startlingly gentle, a reminder that strength and tenderness can live in the same body. At one point it produced a length of smooth wood and a set of stone tools, beginning to carve with deliberate strokes. Chips of fragrant cedar gathered at its feet. I watched as the shape of a spoon emerged, each curve measured and graceful. The work was patient, almost meditative, like a conversation carried out in silence. When it finished, it offered the spoon to me. The gift was simple, yet it felt heavy with meaning, as if it carried an unspoken trust. Night deepened. The fire glowed low and steady, painting the walls in amber waves. I lay on the woven mat, warmth finally reaching the marrow of my bones. The creature settled near the entrance, a silent sentinel against the dark. As sleep tugged at me, I thought of the world beyond these mountains, the noise, the rush, the endless hunger for proof and conquest. Here, those concerns dissolved like mist. There was only the pulse of fire, the breath of stone, and the quiet companionship of a being I could neither explain nor deny. Sometime in the small hours, a sound drifted through the cave, soft, almost melodic. At first I thought it was wind funneling through hidden cracks, but the pattern was too deliberate, rising and falling in gentle cadence. The creature sat motionless, eyes half closed, as the low hum filled the space. It resonated in the rock in the hollow of my chest, like a note struck on some immense and unseen instrument. The vibration stirred a memory I couldn't place, something older than language. When the sound faded, the cave felt impossibly still. I wanted to ask what it meant, but the answer was already in the silence. I drifted into sleep again, the echo of that hum following me into dreams. Morning arrived as a pale glow beyond the entrance, a thin slice of light cutting through the receding storm. The creature stirred, stretching with a fluid grace that made the cavern seem small around it. It checked the sky with a glance, then turned to me, its eyes reflecting a quiet decision. Something had changed overnight. The storm was breaking, and with it, the fragile bond of those hours in the hidden heart of the mountain. I sensed that our time together was nearing an end, though no word or gesture confirmed it. Only the subtle weight of understanding passed between us. Outside, the wind carried a faint scent of new snow and distant pines. The world waited, vast and unknowing, as I prepared to step back into it changed, though I couldn't yet name how. The morning light filtering through the cave mouth felt almost unreal, a soft silver that made every crystal of ice shimmer like it carried its own quiet flame. I sat up slowly, my muscles stiff but awake, the woven mat warm beneath me. The creature was already at the entrance, framed by a curtain of melting icicles that caught the early sun in fractured rainbows. For a moment it looked carved from the very mountain, a living monument to everything the forest keeps hidden. It turned toward me with a measured grace, eyes reflecting the pale dawn. Without a sound, it gestured for me to follow. Something in the angle of its arm, the patient tilt of its head, told me this was goodbye. I gathered the mat from my shoulders, the faint scent of pine and smoke clinging to the fibers, and stepped toward the light. Outside, the storm's fury had softened into a hushed landscape of white. Snow blanketed every branch and boulder, sculpted by the wind into strange, deliberate shapes. The air tasted sharp and clean, the kind of cold that wakes every nerve. Beneath the silence, a single bird call broke like a distant bell, the first life I'd heard in days. We began to walk. The creature moved ahead with unhurried certainty, each step leaving prints that barely dented the crusted snow. I followed those prints, the only path through an endless canvas of white. Every so often it paused, scanning the horizon, its breath a faint cloud against the brightening sky. There was no trail I could see, but it never faltered, as if the mountain itself whispered directions only it could hear. Hours seemed to stretch and fold, time becoming a simple rhythm of footsteps and breath. My mind wandered to the life waiting beyond these woods, the clatter of cities, the constant demand for proof, the endless need to name and measure. Each thought felt thin and distant here, like echoes from a place that no longer fit the shape of who I had become. We passed landmarks I slowly recognized: a twisted pine struck by lightning years ago, a granite outcrop shaped like a sleeping dog. Familiarity crept in like a slow dawn. I realized we were threading back toward the trail I had lost in the storm. Relief flickered through me, tempered by an ache I hadn't expected. Every step toward safety was also a step away from the mystery that had sheltered me. At the edge of a wide clearing, the creatures stopped. Through the trees ahead, I glimpsed the faint indentation of the main trail, already marked by the tracks of hikers or rescuers who had ventured out after the blizzard. The world I knew was only a short walk away. The creature turned to face me. In the stillness of that clearing, I saw details I would carry forever: the layered strands of fur streaked with frost, the faint amber in its eyes, the steady rise and fall of a chest built by a life far older and wilder than mine. It studied me for a long moment, and I felt the unspoken weight of parting. I wanted to say thank you, but words felt brittle, too small to hold the truth of what had happened. Instead, I stepped closer until the cold air between us felt like a single shared breath. The creature extended one massive hand and rested it lightly on my shoulder. The touch was warm, deliberate, an acknowledgement, a benediction, a silent promise that neither of us would forget. Then it released me and stepped back. With a final glance, it turned and moved into the forest, its dark shape dissolving between the trees with an ease that defied sound. Within moments, it was gone, the wilderness swallowing it as though it had never existed. I stood alone, the hush of snow and pine pressing close. The prints it left behind faded almost immediately under a fine drift of wind-blown powder, until even those subtle signs vanished. Only the faint memory of its warmth on my shoulder remained, a ghost of contact that felt more real than the trail ahead. The hike back to the trailhead took hours, though I barely noticed the distance. When I reached the parking area, my truck lay half buried in sculpted drifts. A park ranger waved from a plow truck, surprise flashing across his face as he approached. "Where'd you ride it out?" he asked, voice muffled by his scarf. "In a cave," I said simply. He nodded, satisfied, and turned to help dig out my vehicle. I left it at that. How could I explain 3 days with a being no one would believe existed? To speak of it would betray the quiet trust that had passed between us. Driving down the mountain road, the world outside the windshield felt both familiar and impossibly distant. The forest receded in the rearview mirror, but the memory of those dark, intelligent eyes remained, a presence that no distance could erase. I understood then that what I had witnessed was more than survival. It was a revelation that intelligence wears many shapes and compassion can dwell where we least expect. Even now, months later, I sometimes catch a scent of cedar smoke on an ordinary wind, or see a shadow too tall to name flicker at the edge of a trail. I pause, heart quickening, half expecting to hear that low, melodic hum echo through the trees. Perhaps it's only memory. Perhaps it's something more. What I know is this: the world is larger than our maps, and kindness is a language older than words. Somewhere in those mountains, beyond the reach of roads and reason, walks a being who once chose to save a stranger from the cold. And because of that choice, I carry a new understanding of life itself, of mystery, of grace, and of the silent bonds that tie all living things together. That winter storm nearly ended me, yet it gave me the greatest gift I will ever know, proof that we are not alone, and that even in the deepest wilderness, compassion walks beside us, unseen but never absent.